how do we share stories? How do you, I mean, are you suggesting that people who are curious, people just start asking other people, hey, you mind sharing your story with me? I mean, would that help over food?
Yeah, I think so. I think understanding that is huge, because when you open up with story, right, it humanizes the conversation and the people involved in it. Because I'm hearing your story now, like there's a lot of things that I'm seeing, and you're educating me on why you may do certain things, right? So if I see you do something out in public and I don't necessarily know you, it's easy to label and judge somebody, you know, without understanding and realizing and being aware that you're labeling and judging them, right? And so, and I think it's a lot easier to do that if most people look like you, and those conversations are being shared, and it's kind of a consensus that this is what we're looking at, right? And this is what we're not looking at. And so when you let people tell their own story, it adds a lot more clarity, because it's not close to the truth, although it may be. It's not far from the truth. It is the truth, right? And I think that's the whole essence of the word is hitting the bullseye, right? Making sure we hit the bullseye. And so you can't get that unless you allow people to fill in their own blanks. And so that's at the core of having, and the reason of, why the power story? Why would we even want to know your story? And what does that have to do with our relationship? Well, it means everything, because it's going to change in the spirit and how we see people and how we look at people. And it's a humble way of coming into a conversation, because, although it may be something may be true about someone that looks like that person, it may not be true for that person, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and there are, there are things that, there is a part of truth to, and I'm losing the word, I can't, stereotypes, right? So, there's always a little bit of truth with stereotypes. It's the whole reason why it's a stereotype, right? And so, but the problem is, you can't you can't hedge your bets on stereotypes. And so, although there's a reason why there's some truth to it, that's the question to ask: is why is there some truth to it, right? And you mentioned, the documentary. I think you mentioned it. You watching the 13th.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the best documentaries I've seen in regards to how they orchestrated that study and put it together. I thought it was very well produced.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Big reason is because they use across the country, right? So if you understand culture, you understand that the West Coast, the Midwest, the South, the East Coast, they all have their own cultures, right? It's a culture within a culture. And so the fact that they brought scholars from all different parts of the country, all pretty much saying the same thing, and so it's all historical evidence, it's all factual, it's all cited, it's all research based. I thought it was beautifully produced. And when you look at that, it's kind of like, well, there's like, you got to ask yourself, like, why is one race getting the worst of everything versus, and then you look at the race and say, well, the 1 in 17, the 1 in 4, right, averages from, you got to ask yourself, like, what is that, just by coincidence? I don't think so, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the systemic racism comes into play. And I think with the church, I think you got to understand there's a spirit behind that, right? There's a spirit behind those numbers and why it is the way it is. I mean, by and large, the system, and this is my interpretation of what I'm looking at. There's a system where there's winners and losers and everyone in between. I'm sorry, there's a winner and there's a loser and everything in between. Who's going to be the winner and who's going to be the loser is the problem, right? How do we make something equitable? How do we make something where it's across the board. You know, we can understand the systemic things that we've had that allowed for that order to look the way it looks year in and year out, decade in, decade out. I mean, it's pretty much the same order. Now, the only thing that has changed is within the Hispanic / Latinx community, and that's because their numbers have exploded due to their due to just reproduction. And so because of the numbers and the bodies, right, there's something to a body, right? It used to mean wealth back in the day. It's kind of transitioned a little bit, but it's still wealth in a certain way when it comes to votes, which is why you see a lot of issues with the border and all that stuff plays into it. And I wouldn't say it's the only thing, but it is a thing, because that community, if you look at the numbers, they're the fastest growing culture in the country. And so when you understand the political climate around that, right, those are votes, right? Those are, it's the way we're set up as a democracy is majority rules, right? And so how that plays out economically on who sits at the top and who sits at the bottom, all that stuff is involved. And so, from the church's aspect, making sure that we get back to heart matters, I think is key, because all that stuff is a manifestation of something, right, that we end up seeing. And so my question is what is the church's manifestation to righteousness, and what that looks like in a social justice setting, very much like the Good Samaritan story, right?
I hear you say it's not just prayer. Prayer is important, but action is called for.